You've landed at the edge of what medicine has known and what it's becoming. I'm Dr. Richard Rocker, and this is the Integrative Continuum, a podcast bridging biology, energy, and human potential. In each episode, we explore how quantum biology, frequency medicine, and ancient healing systems are transforming our understanding of health. This is where mitochondria meet meaning and blood work meets bioenergetics. Subscribe now and join me on the frontier of integrative healing, where science and soul are no longer separate. Welcome to the Integrative Continuum. I'm Dr. Richard Rocker. As always, this podcast is about exploring health, medicine, biology, and human potential with curiosity, open-mindedness, and a commitment to standing by the truth as I know it and as I continue to learn it. Today, I'm joined by Chris Newbold, Head of Nutrition at Cytoplan. Chris began his career working in the NHS for 12 years before retraining in nutritional therapy. He went on to run a busy clinical practice in Birmingham and has spent over 20 years in the nutrition industry, supporting practitioners, developing supplements, designing holistic healthcare models, and educating clinicians and students. Chris describes himself as an unapologetic generalist, which I always appreciate because complex health rarely fits neatly into one box. His areas of interest include nutrigenomics, neuropsychology, a little twisting in my mouth here, metabolic health, and more recently, the impact of GLP-1 medications. And that is our topic today, GLP-1s, the promise, the pitfalls, and what practitioners need to understand beyond weight loss alone. These medications are changing the landscape of obesity, diabetes, appetite regulation, and metabolic medicine. But they also raise important questions about the muscle loss, nutrient intake, gut function, long-term dependency, metabolic resilience, and whether we are truly restoring health or simply suppressing appetite. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Richard. Great to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Now, Chris, before we get into GLP-1s, could you give the listeners a little bit of your background from the NHS into nutritional therapy, clinical practice, and then into education and product development?
Sure, yeah. So I've been around a while and sort of 40 odd years ago started working in health, really. And I've always been a therapist. I think that's been the kind of common thread through my career. So I started out in the NHS actually as a speech and language therapist, working with people with communication problems in hospital settings, health centre settings, adults, children, etc. The usual story that's probably fairly common of when I got into my 30s, I experienced my own health challenges with fatigue, stress, etc., and started to look around at how to help myself because it was, subclinical stuff, nothing really wrong with me type explanation from the doctors. So I just picked up a book by Patrick Holford, like a lot of people did back then in the early 2000s, and discovered this thing called Optimum Nutrition and just started to read about it, did a course in it, became a practitioner, and then started to work for supplement companies as well and got really into sort of supplement design. And since then, I've been a nutritional therapist, really working with other practitioners, doing practitioner education, designing supplements. And my interest as well, which you alluded to in that intro, is we get lots of alternative explanations for things in the complementary therapy world, competing explanations, really. And I've always been interested in how they all fit together, how the genetics fits in with the exposome, with what's going on in the body. I always say, how can it all be true? How can all these things that we know all be true? How do they fit into a healthcare model? So unapologetically generalist and holistic, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you describe yourself as an unapologetic generalist, what does that mean to you, and why do you think generalists are important in our modern healthcare?
Yeah, exactly. It's I've noticed there's a big trend in nutrition in particular and sort of functional medicine kind of arenas, orthomolecular medicine kind of world of I'm a specialist in gut, I'm a specialist in female hormones, etc. And I think that's great, by the way. I'm not saying that's not an important thing, but also I do think it's hopefully those people are practicing with a big generalist model in their head as well. And I kind of think, if you're into holistic medicine and you have a whole healthcare model, you can kind of deal with anything really. You ought to be able to deal with anything because we're really dealing with underlying processes, underlying physiological processes and universal underlying truths rather than maybe sometimes, which is not, I'm not hugely a fan of zooming in on a particular pathway and a particular enzyme and mechanism and kind of saying it's this, it's one of my bugbears is it's histamine intolerance or it's SIBO. And not that I'm saying that those things aren't real problems, that there aren't imbalances in the gut in certain places more than others, or that some people don't have a problem with histamine containing foods. But I feel like sometimes we get very functional and almost pseudo medical and diagnostic, as if we're looking to diagnose a disease in a sort of single unitary way and look for a single unitary answer. And we just need to always pull ourselves back from that, I think, as holistic minded practitioners, and kind of zoom out and ignore the diagnosis a little bit and think about what's going on overall in the body. So, I'm an unapologetic generalist, understanding that I also, with my nutrigenomics, I do like to zoom in on pathways and I love the detail, but also make sure that I zoom out and see the big picture.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And it's, you're right. We have, there's probably hundreds, if not maybe thousands of different specialists out there now. And yeah, they're all focusing on this one little pathway or aspect. And like you say, it's fascinating, but is that one little thing going to make somebody better? Is that going to get them the results? And, the body works as a system. Even when I see blood tests in the clinic, and people bring me their blood tests from their doctor, and I just start laughing at it because I'm going, well, I can't tell. There's just not enough information here. All right. I always use the example. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle with 10% of the pieces. I said, I can't really tell you what the picture is because there's not enough information. So we do have to look at it as a whole. Absolutely. We mentioned that you're the head of nutrition at Cytoplan. So what drew you into that role and what are you trying to build from an education perspective?
Yeah, so again, it's Cytoplan's a supplement company. Our predominant business is to sell supplements, although it's charity owned by a nutrition foundation based in the UK. So all the profits go to that charity, which is great. It's not that it's not for profit, but the growth is there with the right intention, if you like, behind it. As we grow, and we intend to grow, we grow with the right intention, really. And it's not just about the supplements for me, and that's very much why Cytoplan brought me on board. Is I'm known to be someone who looks at whole healthcare models. Like I just said, I always approach this from the point of view of how is the body working, what's going on here with different people, and how do the supplements fit into that alongside the other exposome things we can change, the big ones being diet and lifestyle and all that other stuff that's not to do with supplements. How does it all fit together when you're looking at somebody who's got problems with stress or gut, etc.? So I think as well, I've noticed in the industry, and especially in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a growth of, social media companies jumping on the supplement bandwagon. I think it's become an even bigger thing in the last 10 years of, people are buying these supplements, that I want a piece of that. Design a supplement on what I call, the back of a beer mat. And actually you can just get a third party company to do that for you. We'll design your supplement. We'll put your logo on it. You just market it. And there's some very fierce social media marketing of these supplements where it's actually quite difficult when I look at them and I go, another sleep supplement in my Facebook newsfeed. What's in it? I can't find out what's in it. It's actually really hard to drill down and actually see the ingredients. And normally when I see the ingredients, I'm usually quite disappointed with the thinking behind it. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think you need to base your supplement design on that whole healthcare model. It's not just an add-on. It's not just we're making supplements over here and we're doing practitioner education over here. And really the practitioner education is kind of a form of marketing where you get out to practitioners and say, come and have some CPD for a day. Yeah. We'll teach you some great stuff. We'll all have a nice time. Oh, and there are some supplements over here that you might want to buy. For me, the whole thing has to be integrated. And I think what practitioners need to know when they come for education is, okay, what's going on with the gut? What's going on with GLPs? What's interesting about it? And therefore, how do your products, if I'm going to recommend your products, fit into that? And do they make sense? So that's where I come from, as I see myself as a nutritional therapist first and foremost at Cytoplan. That's my bedrock, understanding the health and the issues behind GLP-1 medications, for example, and their use. And then how does that influence my education? How does that influence my healthcare model and my thinking around it? And how does that influence the supplements that we're offering? And are they the right supplements? Are they going to give practitioners and your clients the solutions they need to really work?
Yeah. Before we dive into GLP-1s, just about the supplements, the Cytoplan. So with supplements in general, what should people really be looking for a good quality supplement? How do they know that they have something good? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a good brand, and that sounds like a really obvious point, and of course I'm going to say that, but I think try to know, especially if you're a practitioner, try to know the brands that seem to be more practitioner orientated. It's not always a cast iron guarantee of quality, but does the company have practitioners working for it, designing the products? What's their experience in the world? Do they listen? And there are a couple of companies, to be fair, out there, not just Cytoplan, who would tick that box, of course, who are in it for practitioners, because I think it's about that healthcare model being behind it. Then there's the whole thing about looking at the quality, the stuff you can pick up on the label. Do the nutrient forms look like good forms, without getting into the world of, what's a good form of magnesium? But do they appear to know their stuff in terms of using those? We call them at Cytoplan bioeffective. It's our tagline for our principle for, is this supplement bioeffective? Is it going to be effective in the body? And there's a number of kind of levels to that. Is it well absorbed? Does it get to the place it needs to go to? So if you have got knowledge of that, or you can talk to somebody who is the company using those ingredients? Clean supplements, which is a little bit more complicated than people think. Of course, we all want clean supplements. We only want the actives in there. We don't want any of the so-called rubbish or, the sort of processed foody additives that also find their way into supplements. But that's more complicated than you think. And so I've worked in this industry for 20 years now, so I know all the sort of foibles about you can't put B vitamins in a liquid without using a preservative. If you did, you'd be mad, and it would start to go off very quickly as all the bacteria start to use up those B vitamins to grow and reproduce. So there are some provisos to that in terms of the reality of stability and quality. So for me, it's always a compromise between a shelf-stable product that is going to say what it's got, it's got what it's got in it on the tin. That's what you're going to get. A probiotic should be stable to end of shelf life. You shouldn't be having loss of bacteria. So there are some provisos where you do sometimes need to use things like stabilizers, flow agents. Some ingredients are intrinsically more sticky. You're going to get into trouble in terms of dosing if you don't use them. But our principle at Cytoplan is as clean as they need to be. And always striving to only put in what absolutely has to be there from a stability and a quality point of view as well. So look out for that. But clean for sure, but don't think of clean, I always say, as being the be all and end all. There's no point in a clean supplement that doesn't work. Don't go clean for clean's sake. And are they doing education? Can you pick up the phone and talk to them, and they'll give you advice about the product in an objective way, and about what your needs are. Sometimes maybe even saying you're taking too many supplements, stop taking them. Let's see if we can make that simpler for you. Are they in it for the right reasons, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, GLP-1s. So when did GLP-1 medications first come into your radar as something that nutrition or practitioners really needed to understand?
Yeah. Last year, actually, early to mid last year, I mean, I'd ignored them thinking, no, pharmaceutical, terrible.
Yeah.
This is not what people should be doing. And then my friend sort of came round to see me and he looked great. It was just what that classic cliched situation. I just went, God, you look great. He'd lost a bit of weight, but it wasn't so much that. It was that he just looked better. He was just glowing. And I just said, God, you look great. You look so well, it's almost like a bit of an insult when you say that to people, I think. But it's like, well, how did I look before? But he did. And I said, well, what have you been doing? Oh, GLP-1 injections. I was like, what? Really? Okay, this is not in my world. This is pharma world. This is the antithesis. This is the evil side of the world that I don't normally have any truck with. So then I just started thinking about it and started to look at it online, and I got into the YouTube video world of GLP-1 users, which is a bit of a quagmire, to be honest. But there's loads of great videos on there where people are bearing their souls and their whole journey for better or for worse. So you get a lot of good insights into what people are doing, and then the sort of social media world as well. So I started to learn about it. I read the Johann Hari book, if anyone's seen it, which is kind of an okay book written by a journalist, maybe a little bit Marmite in terms of whether people like his stuff, but he's done some stuff on addictions, and he's a very good writer in terms of making these things accessible and popular. So that was a good kind of overview. And then, of course, the next thing I did was go, okay, so what's my perspective on this? And my perspective actually was kind of on the fence. It was, I can actually see some positives here. I can see that if you are really metabolically challenged, if you are not necessarily completely obese, but if you are fairly overweight, very overweight, you're probably never going to come and see an NT or a complementary therapy practitioner you've tried all the diets, you've done the yo-yo dieting stuff, you've struggled with it. Arguably, and this is a debatable point, it's a disease, it's genetic, which again, I think is an oversimplification. But I think for sure we have to accept that there are some people who struggle more from an appetite regulation point of view. And there's absolutely environmental stuff around that, and upbringing and relationship with food, not just genetics, but there is a genetic component. And if you maybe handle sugars and fats differently, and I absolutely have thought, as someone who is potentially overweight myself as well, and varying at times of my life, I can easily put a lot of weight on. I know that there are some people who just metabolically, despite calories in, calories out models, just are more inclined to put weight on in certain areas of their body. So if you are that person, I think, who has more of a struggle and also probably is not inclined to go and see a nutritional therapist and, do it properly in inverted commas, which would always be the preference, is this a solution for you that's actually going to give you a way in to actually starting to metabolically change? And I do think for some people, this is the positive I'm spinning now, for some people, like my friend, arguably, this was his way in to suddenly having an opportunity to change his diet. He went keto as well straight away, which I don't know, was a bit debatable about whether it was all too much.
Yeah.
And there were some interesting symptoms that came as a result of that. But it gave him the opportunity to go, what am I going to do with my diet now? Now I just suddenly have lost the food noise, which is the big word everybody talks about online. The immediate thing people notice, these people who overeat, and, I've been one of them in the past as well, is I'm just not thinking about food. Of course, there's a big negative to that, I'm sure we'll come on to. Yeah. But I'm just not thinking about food. So, what can I do? What can I do with this opportunity? So I do think that's the sort of big positive that I became aware of, and suddenly I became less cynical and I could see an opportunity. Equally, at the same time, I started to look at the research going, well, what's the downside? There's got to be a massive downside to this. And the digestive problems that I'm sure we'll come on to, the slowed motility, the reduced enzymes, the reduced bile flow, the scare stories about pancreatitis, thyroid cancer, big negatives. And I started to research that and sort of develop my view of it, really, over time, and thinking this is something that we need to be understanding. This is going to be massive, and it's absolutely continued in the last year in particular to accelerate, and it's something we need to be on and we need to be ready for, and we need to be playing a big part in it. So I started to develop Cytoplan's materials, my own perspective on it, my own slides on it. And I've really ended up spending kind of the last 6 to 9 months in particular, kind of going around talking to people about how we as complementary therapists can engage with the GLP-1 world and how we need to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I look forward to getting into that in a bit. So maybe for the listeners who have heard about GLP-1, so we've got Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and semaglutides. So for the people that have heard about it, but they don't really understand the biology, can you explain what is a GLP-1 and what is a GLP-1 supposed to do naturally in the body?
Yeah, so it's as you've just alluded to, it's a natural hormone in the body. I always describe it very simplistically, but it really helps me get it as you've had enough to eat. You're a satiety hormone, essentially. You've got enough food going on in your system, various levels, in particular in the gut, to deal with. This is enough. And what GLP-1 and GIP and the related proteins do, GLP-1 and GIP really, is through various signaling mechanisms, they start to shut things down. So it's called an incretin. That's the official word. And it was discovered in relation to diabetes way back in the 60s, I think. So it goes back, over 50 years from the point of view of us knowing about these hormones. And the incretins, when they were discovered, it was basically, notice that you got a larger insulin response from the contents of your gut than from your blood sugar levels. So this was the discovery in the mid-60s of, oh, wow, it all starts with the gut. The gut is doing the signaling first. Surprise, surprise. I mean, it makes sense from every point of view. So the taste receptors and I think various other receptors in the gut are kind of noticing that you've eaten, a shed load of carbs and fat normally. They're present in your gut. And also at that point kind of go in and actually, you know what? This is too much for us to handle. You've actually taken on, a whole bucket full of donuts or whatever, or KFC, and we're going to start signaling to your body right away a couple of things to deal with it, to mitigate the effects. So what they then do is fundamentally, the first thing they do is they improve insulin response. They actually increase insulin, but it's a little bit more subtle and complex than that, because that sounds like a negative. It plays out as a positive for people mostly. They improve insulin response is a better way to say it, which is why they immediately, the pharmaceutical industry immediately started to look at how they could get this as a diabetic drug. So you start to transport glucose into your cells more efficiently. You start to burn that glucose more efficiently in theory. It's a bit of a problem with insulin resistance, but overall it seems like eventually it improves insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. So that's the first thing. If you're going to take in a gut load of food, let's make sure you use it for energy. Obviously, you might still be a very sedentary person having eaten that KFC bucket. So maybe that's not the only thing that's going to get you out of jail that the GLP-1 and the GIP's going to do. And the second thing it does is it slows down your digestion. So it kind of actually via the brain and via the gut hormones that do the signaling in the gut and in the stomach, it kind of goes, right, let's slow this down. It slows gastric emptying, and that's the key mechanism. And then probably a lot of the other mechanisms flow from the slowed gastric emptying. So immediately that has an impact on your relationship with food from a physical point of view, in that if your gastric emptying slows, you feel fuller for longer. You don't think about food. You don't want to eat food. You feel more full up than you would have done otherwise with GLP-1's activity. And so far, by the way, I'm still talking about natural GLP-1, how it's supposed to work naturally, right? But we'll get on to when you shove a stack of GLP-1 into your body artificially. But this is what it's trying to do naturally. And then it also signals to the appetite. In doing so as well, by the way, it reduces hydrochloric acid production and slows that down. It's essentially trying to liberate less food enzymatically that then might raise your blood sugar levels or your lipid levels inappropriately. It reduces gallbladder function to reduce emulsification of fats. It slows motility down in the stomach and the upper gut in particular, maybe speeds it up in the colon, but definitely slows it down for most of the gut. All of this is almost trying to say there's too much stuff in your gut, so we're going to try and stop you absorbing it all, cut off the supply of excess glucose and lipids in particular. It might therefore affect a bunch of other things, as you can imagine. We'll come on to the consequences, I'm sure. The next thing it does is it straight to the brain and affects the appetite centers. So it starts to affect POMC, which is your kind of leptin relates a little bit on the leptin pathway, your satiety pathway, basically. So it increases your satiety and it reduces your kind of ghrelin pathway, which is your I'm hungry hormone in your brain, in your hypothalamus, that's telling you need to eat. It also seems to modulate dopamine pathways, lower dopamine kind of, in the dopamine reward pathways, because of course appetite is not just about physical hunger, especially in the modern world. It's about, I really want to eat that. I fancy eating that. A lot of our eating behavior, especially in the processed food world, is based around addiction. Essentially, we're all to some degree, addicted to certain things that we enjoy eating or drinking. So it's inevitable that the GLP-1 kind of suppresses that and almost stops you wanting to eat certain things that you may be more inclined to eat more of. So it does tend to cut down the more addictive foods and in particular alcohol and those other addictive things as well, not just foods, but drinks and maybe other associated substances that the dopamine system might be priming us to want to take. So that's the kind of natural cascade of what the GLP-1 and to some extent GIP is doing, and they overlap a little, and they're also slightly different in terms of their activity on glucagon as well. Did you want me to just talk, Richard, about the development of the drug following on from that, maybe?
You had just mentioned that was the kind of the natural GLP-1 signaling. So how do GLP-1 receptor agonists differ from our natural GLP-1 signaling? Maybe can we differentiate that, or is there any big differentiation?
A bit, yeah. So it's all about they're all agonists. So, GLP-1, as you just alluded to, locks onto GLP-1 receptors. So the gut produces GLP-1 and GIP in different places, and that has some local gut activity, but also it gets into the system, and there are receptors, in the pancreas and in the brain, etc., as you'd expect to have this cascade effect at different levels I've talked about. So coming back to the development a bit, because those two things can segue together, this seemed like an opportunity for diabetes in particular, because it was really noticed about its insulin regulating effects initially. It took until about the 90s for us to figure out the kind of pharmacokinetics, if that's the right word, of GLP-1s. And what it was found was that they're actually quite short-acting hormones. They have this cascade that happens over hours, but their effect is fairly immediate and they're fairly short acting on those receptors. And we have an enzyme called DPP4 that breaks down certain proteins and peptides, including dietary ones like gluten. And this DPP4 enzyme breaks down our GLP-1 quite quickly. So that was the problem, is if we were going to create something that had a GLP-1 like effect and was a GLP-1 agonist, and could we somehow accentuate this effect physiologically and see what would happen, we needed to synthesize GLP-1 effectively, the GLP-1 peptide. And it was actually a lizard, the Gila monster, some massive lizard that somebody found in the 90s secreted a venom that was GLP-1 like. So absolutely random, crazy fact about GLP-1s. And they noticed that this GLP-1 like peptide from this venom, from this lizard venom, was more resistant to DPP4 breakdown. So they had the clue about how we could synthesize, and I think that's important, is we are synthesizing a GLP-1 like peptide that is subtly different in structure and is less susceptible to DPP-4 breakdown. And that was the breakthrough really in the early 2000s that led to the first diabetic medication, GLP-1 agonists, being produced by the good old pharmaceutical industry, who obviously was seeing a big opportunity here to make money, of course.
Yeah.
And they created exenatide, I think was the first one, possibly, or one of the earlier ones, for diabetes. So they've only really been around for about 20 years as mainstream diabetic medication. But they needed to get over this problem of how do you keep it in the body for long enough? And that's really why up until very recently as well, they have been injections. There's not been a pill until very recently, an oral pill. They've all had to be weak injections that people give because the half-life, or rather the active life is probably more accurate to say, of the GLP-1 medications, although they've improved, is we think around 5 to 6 days, and people do tend to notice a bit of a uptick in food noise in the last couple of days before they re-inject. It's a bit of a high activity, and then it descends over time to day 5 or 6, and then re-inject, and that's all really to do with the pharmacokinetic activity of the GLP-1 synthetics in the body. But to come back to your question, they work in the same way. There's a slightly different structure. I don't know, be interesting to know over time whether there's a downside to that synthetic element to it. It's not quite your natural GLP-1 protein that you're producing, but very, very similar, and ostensibly, as far as we know, working in the same way.
Yeah. So is it accurate to say that these drugs are simply appetite suppressants, or is that just too simplistic?
It's the main way they work. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the magic wand, if there is one of them, and literally people report this, I can't believe that I've gone through a whole day without thinking of food. Yeah. This is just incredible. It's just an incredible step change for people who normally are eating food, every half an hour, and very addictive, very dangerous foods for their health. But that is the main thing. It's the food noise drops. The food noise drops, though, probably for a few reasons. You're handling glucose more efficiently. Your gastric emptying is slowing. You're probably digesting and absorbing less nutrients, and there's a potential downside to that. Yeah. But, for the overeater, they're suddenly not digesting and absorbing a massive amount of sugar and fat that they otherwise would be absorbing. So it's a combination of things. There are multiple effects through the body, and that's where we start to see some of the upside stroke downsides and the double-edged nature of these medications in certain areas. But, to be fair, the predominant thing that people notice and that makes a difference to them is they just eat less food. Less often, and it's about what is that, when are you eating, and what is it that you're eating that almost becomes the next challenge for people that we need to be helping them with.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, are we seeing benefits that go beyond weight loss alone, such as, let's say, glucose regulation, inflammation, cardiovascular risk, fatty liver?
Yeah. So this is another positive. And again, I'm going to go, guys, don't say these are all evil. I mean, there are some big positives potentially. Absolutely. So in the development of the drug in the last 20 years as well, going back to that, this was what was interesting, is that they noticed as they were giving the drug to diabetics over the last 20 years, that funnily enough, you might have predicted it, they were losing weight. Ka-ching moment number one for the pharmaceutical industry was, oh my God, they're losing a lot of weight. Well, you'd expect that, wouldn't you, if you're improving their insulin response anyway. But they were also losing weight because their appetite was being affected, and they were just eating a lot less often. They were also noticing reductions in HbA1c and some of those diabetic markers where the persistent high blood glucose was having negative consequences on cellular function, breaking down cells. And And also, the other big thing that they were noticing was cardiometabolic risk factors were reducing. So initially, I think the data was you were getting like 15%-ish weight loss, not outstanding, but certainly very significant. And you were getting a certain reduction in cardiovascular risk, 13%, I think, ish. So, modest, but you were noticing that people who we would currently characterize, perhaps in our world, as metabolic syndrome. And I think this is where there's a big benefit for people, where I think it is a potential solution to look at. People who otherwise are going to really struggle and are at a place in their lives where they need something big to unlock a metabolic change for them. These people absolutely seem to have benefits where their weight starts to reduce, and it massively needs to reduce. Their blood sugar starts to stabilize, their insulin response starts to improve, and they move away from being pre-diabetic if they were pre-diabetic, or their diabetes markers improves, and their cardiovascular risk improves. And as you said earlier as well, their inflammatory pattern seems to reduce as well. And if all of that metabolic dysfunction is underpinning their inflammatory profile and their other chronic disease profile, well, guess what? When you fix that, their inflammatory profile improves, and their arthritis or, whatever it is, starts to get better as well. So this is potentially a big upside for those people, because you are getting some quite significant metabolic and inflammatory changes that can be positive for people.
Yeah. So do you think these drugs are changing how the public understands obesity, let's say from a willpower issue to a neuroendocrine metabolic issue?
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. I think it's weird, isn't it? I think you've got to, as we get in these discussions so much these days, which we always need to pull ourselves back from, you get polarized opinions with everything these days, don't you? And we're toxically, intoxicated by polarized opinions on social media, in our social media echo chambers these days. And, the information assume, or whatever we want to call it, is one of the most dangerous things in the world at the moment, I think, in terms of oversimplification of things. You are tending to get a polarization in the GLP-1 debate, I think, of, I told you it was a disease. I told you it was that there was something wrong with me. My obesity is a disease. It's a medical condition. I can't do anything about it. It's not my fault. Okay. And then you've got I think still a lot of snobbery around GLP-1s and the people who choose to take them, of, oh, well, you were just fat and lazy and you couldn't be bothered to do it properly. And, I find it insulting that I've lost weight properly and you've cheated. And so it's seen as a cheat, because actually you just need to modify your behavior. And you kind of got those two extremes still. I think what I hope is where we'll move to is a more refined position of, do you know what? In a way, both of those things are true. It's nature, nurture. Maybe different bits are true for different people, but let's understand that there is a behavioral addiction, environmental thing here, but actually also that does make it super hard for certain people to eat the right foods. It's almost like society is, I don't know if you find this like I do, but when you go on the road, however well you try to eat, it's almost like the world is conspiring against you to eat any decent food. It's so hard, especially when things are more out of your control, when you're in different environments, to eat well and to do things well and to eat at the right times that you're supposed to eat at. So there is an element that the environment is the problem and makes it really difficult. And actually, we do need to be better at our engagement with our environment. But also there is absolutely an element that either through experience or genetics, some people struggle more with this. And to some extent, I don't want to call it a disease, because let's go back to my point earlier about let's not overly medicalize things. But what I want to say is that there are some people who it's more inbuilt for them that they're going to have more of a problem with that environment and they're going to have more of a problem with what they do with those sugars and fats when they eat them than the other person sitting next to them. The classic example of the person who can eat an entire packet of biscuits and never put on a kilo,
Yes.
and the other people who just look at a packet of biscuits and put on 3 kilos. So there's obviously that biochemical individuality there. And this explains the obesity epidemic as well to me a little bit, in that, of course, the obesity epidemic is mostly environmental. Of course, it's to do with the change in our relationship with food and the commoditization of food since the mid-1970s, since the sort of processed food revolution. Of course, it's that. But also notice that there are some people who are more likely to have got overweight over the last 50 years in the context of that exposome, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And there are still some people who seem to eat a load of rubbish and stay quite skinny. Well, yeah, maybe they're not healthy actually, because maybe they've got loads of visceral fat, and they could be the person who keels over from a heart attack in their 40s or 50s, even though they look fine. But you have got that thing where I think some people are more responsive to those environmental changes we've experienced than that. So I still feel like obesity and overweight and that whole problem is obviously a nature-nurture problem. And for some people, they do have more of a problem with it. So I don't think we're there yet with kind of going, have we got a more refined idea of why people overeat and why people are overweight and the relationships in the system? But videos like this on YouTube, and there's loads of great people out there actually who obviously aren't like us, aren't practitioners, aren't into the physiology world. And it's so lovely to see these normal people refining and developing their knowledge about what's going on in their bodies and learning about it and learning about what they need to do to maintain their weight loss. Equally, you do seem to have a load of people who are just injecting to get as skinny as possible.
Yeah.
And aren't really engaging with the why. And so that's the big challenge for me, is let's just get everybody starting to understand this better, what's going on in their bodies, whether they need the injections or not to some degree, but let's use it as an opportunity to really understand what's going wrong with our metabolisms in the modern world.
Yeah. So I think on that note, so then could GLP-1 therapy be a bridge for some people, helping them to get, let's say, build a momentum to make deeper lifestyle changes?
Definitely. I think that's it. I think it's the window of opportunity. And I think we've just got to be there to educate them and to get to as many of those people as possible to say, you've heard about the weight loss jabs, right? Let me tell you what this is about, because there are downsides. There are major downsides that people need to be aware of. This isn't an ideal solution for anyone in a way, but it might be the only solution for some people that's actually going to give them the headspace to act. I think what I'm trying to say here is that for some people, they suddenly start to think about their metabolism because the act of being prescribed GLP-1 injections and seeing the difference might be the revelation point for them, where they go, oh, let me think about what I've been doing and why I've got to this place and what I might need to do in future. I think that's the prize for us. That we need to make sure happens in the next 5 years as this thing explodes.
Yeah, I think we're at a little bit of a risk of medicalizing appetite without asking why the appetite, the satiety, insulin, inflammation, energy regulation has become dysregulated in the first place.
Exactly so. Yeah. So this is a sledgehammer to crack a nut, literally.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we're talking about the medications and the tirzepatides, etc., Mounjaro, they are very powerful. That process I described earlier, you are injecting a shed load of this synthetic version of GLP-1, and you are not supposed to do that. Make no bones about it. This is artificial, totally pharmaceutical, changing of physiology in a major way. It's a very significant thing that you're doing to your body. Yeah.
So one concern I have is that with the weight loss, I think people get confused. It's not the same as health gain. So how do we distinguish fat loss, muscle loss, water loss, and a true metabolic improvement?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I'm not sure that's happening an awful lot.
Yeah.
I think while I hope that a certain subsection of people for whom this is a revelation and life changing start to consider those things, that they've made some great videos on YouTube. As this becomes more popularized and you're just going, oh, my friend did it and lost loads of weight, so if I can find the money, I'm going to do it as well because I could do, these are people who are hopefully genuinely overweight. That's what we should be talking about. But yeah, I don't think anyone really is looking at that. So that's another more complex version of the story to introduce to them is, does being overweight equate to being unwell for a start? So to be fair, for the first start of this conversation, we've assumed so.
Yeah.
I've assumed so. I kind of go with that. But let's just step back and go, that's not always the case. You can have healthy overweight people and very unhealthy, normal weight people who, look okay. Is just losing weight, losing kilos, standing on the scales and seeing it, fall off you healthy? Of course it's not, because one of the main downsides of the medications is I think people are losing weight too fast.
Yeah.
Wegovy is arguably the best version. I think it's about 15 to 20% weight loss and a bit slower and steadier because it's a single agonist. It's just GLP-1, so it's a single action, and that's semaglutide, also known, or semaglutide. People pronounce it as two different ways of saying it. I think it's supposed to be semaglutide, actually. So that's interesting. 15% weight loss. When you get to tirzepatide, Mounjaro, you're on 20% weight loss. It's GLP-1 and GIP. And by the way, what the GIP is doing is it's also boosting glucagon, which sounds like a negative thing to do because it opposes insulin. It's boosting glucagon during your fasted periods. So it has a much longer effect. Although it activates quite quickly, the glucagon effect that it activates is acting in hypoglycemia. So when you're in fasted state. So the reason tirzepatide is more effective is that it's burning fat, because what glucagon does is gets fat from stores when you're in a hypoglycemic state to create more blood sugar for you. In the absence of a biscuit, it'll raise your blood glucose from stores meaning glycogen or fat. So you get an extra fat burning effect in between meals. So that's where the extra effect goes. Now, although that's fat burning, there is a very big risk that what people are doing, and this is one of the big downsides of GLP-1s, is you lose muscle, and you lose water, dehydration, and you lose bone mass and collagen in bone and in skin. So you get people who, if they don't think about it and they don't get this message, just think it's amazing. And they think they look amazing because they're buying new clothes, but actually their friends are looking at them going, you look a bit gaunt actually, and you've almost gone into like catabolism, and you're not eating you're eating so little, you're not eating with such long periods because you've not done it properly, that you're actually breaking down muscle tissue in your face. So it goes without saying almost that muscle loss, especially the faster you lose the weight, and the more your appetite is suppressed and maybe you're not managing that well, you go the whole day so you just don't feel hungry, and maybe just binge on some ice cream in the evening or whatever. This is like a classic bad, Mounjaro jab scenario, not eating all day and then eating crap in the evening, a little bit of crap in the evening that you fancy. You are going to get so nutrient deficient in that scenario, and to the point where, you're going to start breaking down muscle. You're going to start breaking the collagen down in your bones and in your skin to create energy. You're in catabolism and you're using protein for energy. Just like with someone who's starving, just like with somebody maybe with an eating disorder, an anorexic style eating disorder, you're going to be in that, almost pseudo anorexia scenario. That's a big alarm bell for people to go. And also, by the way, just moving on to the triple jab that's going to be licensed, I think, if this year, the retatrutide, I think it's pronounced. That's got glucagon as well. And there's some real concerns that, the 30% weight loss you get on that is too fast. So one of my big concerns about this that we need to manage is too rapid weight loss, because people equate weight loss with health.
Yeah.
And that's a great example there I've just given where, actually a lot of people could end up being more unhealthy. Then if they come off the injections, put the weight back on, if they go, I can't afford this anymore, I've achieved my target weight, now I'm going to do it through diet. The evidence is if they just come off the injections like that and they haven't really made any other changes and they're not able to make those changes, they put all the weight back on or most of it within a year. You're then going to have a more overweight, but with lower muscle mass, lower bone mass, lower levels of collagen, possibly nutrient deficient individual who's actually more unhealthy as a result of their weight loss journey 2 years down the line. And I think we might start to see that kind of person coming into our clinics, thinking about the timeline of when Mounjaro in particular became really popularized, I think, which was about 2 to 3 years ago, to be honest. I think we're going to start to see people coming through who are at that point on their weight loss journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's critical for people to understand that weight loss can be fat and it can be muscle, and we want to have a healthy body composition, and that's always by keeping a higher lean mass rate and a lower body fat. And just like you mentioned, people with eating disorders as well, it's tricky. I've had in the clinic, sometimes you're dealing with somebody that has an eating disorder and they look like skin and bones when you measure them, and it comes out, they're something like 40-45% body fat because they have no lean tissue, and I can't tell them that they're 40-45% body fat. Otherwise, that just reinforces the picture in their head. So it can sometimes be a little complicated. But I think we have to, from what we're talking about here, I think the nutrition and the exercise, especially kind of resistance training, are going to be important for people to understand, because if we are losing these, then this is the one thing that we have to do to maintain it. We can't expect just to have a shot and we're going to be of perfect health. And I think this is what people really need to understand. So in terms of nutrition and maybe even supplementation, because you're developing wonderful products in that, what would somebody look at in terms of nutrition?
Yeah. So I definitely, number one, coming back to it, it's about what they eat when they are eating less and when they eat. So it's important that people keep eating at regular intervals, even if they don't feel like eating a lot, rather than starving for long periods and overly fasting, because that's a danger. And it's not sustainable for them in the long run to do that, and to eat better quality food. Even if you do that, because of the powerful effects of these medications, you are inevitably going to digest and absorb less. And some of that's going to be micronutrients and potentially protein and potentially water. So the main things is to make sure you keep your protein uptake up and your water intake, and that you're drinking and not forgetting to drink. You're potentially on a much reduced amount of water from food and drinks overall on these injections. You're likely to benefit then from a multivitamin supplement, even if you don't need everything in that multivitamin. I would say it's a very simple choice for people, and I would say make sure you look for one that's got good levels of the fat soluble nutrients in particular, which not all of them have. So check the multivitamin label, and it needs to have some vitamin A in it, not just as beta carotene but as actual vitamin A. It will have vitamin D in it, but also I'd say a good level, at least what we call 1,000 international units, if not 2,000 international units. We all know that vitamin D insufficiency is rife, and the GLP-1 injections potentially can only make that worse because we don't have a lot of vitamin D in the diet, and it tends to be in those fatty foods as well, if we eat them. Vitamin K to go along with the vitamin D, which won't be included in every multi, because for some people, if they're on warfarin inappropriately, they'd be advised to avoid vitamin K. So you don't always put vitamin K with vitamin D to give people the choice of varying, but make sure your multi's got K2, vitamin K2 in it, as well as vitamin D3. I'd also possibly, especially if exercising, which we hope people do, use it as an opportunity to get down the gym or whatever, or in their own house, do resistance work. mostly, it's important to do that resistance work. And so you might need protein support in the diet, or if you can't get enough in the diet, protein shakes as a, less good but inevitable option that I think some people have to fall back on, and not terrible, and possibly some collagen as well, particularly for people who are older, who might need extra collagen support, because they may well be losing, collagen is a predominant protein in the human body. You start to lose protein, you're losing collagen, and that's when it's starting to affect your skin quality, your bone mass, your gut lining quality, and all those other things. So multi plus possibly collagen. People might want to look at their B12 levels specifically as well. So there's an argument for extra B12, especially if you came in to taking the jabs and maybe you were already a little bit B12 deficient. So perhaps those blood tests helping to give us part of the story there. Same with vitamin D, to be fair, that take a baseline vitamin D anyway of 1,000 to 2,000 IUs, but there might be people who need, 5, 10,000 IUs who are more insufficient or deficient. So you might need to top up the multi.
Yeah.
And the next thing is that I think so my first choice would be a multi, maybe with a few extra mods. My next thing would be digestive support. And although it sounds contradictory, because in a way the GLP-1s are inhibiting digestive capability, we do want to make sure that the less food that you're eating, we are liberating the micronutrients in particular, and we are making good use of the fats that we're eating. So, and the other problem with that is if we don't digest and absorb those carbs, fats, proteins, micronutrients that we're eating, the lesser amount of, the bad bugs in the gut will get hold of them, and you'll start to get maybe even more gut problems and gut imbalances and gut bacteria. So I would say use a digestive enzyme would be the other thing in particular, and particularly one that's got ideally hydrochloric acid added, a protease that works in the stomach in acidity. Sometimes that's pepsin. You'll see it as pepsin on labels. Sometimes it's a particular protease that works at a particular pH, and other proteases and lipases to digest the fats, and possibly some bile support in there. Things like artichoke, ginger, choline, useful. Sometimes you get those in enzyme products. We're going to produce one for Cytoplan in the autumn where we put all these things in one place for people. Sometimes, or at the moment, you might need a digestive enzyme and something that's more like a liver support or gallbladder support that might have artichoke, choline, and it might be sort of two separate products you're looking at there. But you really want to support your stomach acid function, your gallbladder function, your digestive enzymes, to make sure you are making the most of the less food that you're eating. And that won't in any way counteract the effects of the medications if people are worried about that. Like, oh gosh, if I start digesting my fats better, aren't I just going to start to get fat again? Honestly, the improved activity of the enzymes are a drop in the ocean compared to how GLP-1 is suppressing your appetite. So those two things will work together very well. You'll still be eating less, but you'll be making the most of the food that you are eating by taking a digestive enzyme product.
Yeah. So it sounds to me, how do I put this? It sounds to me that the problem that people have, that where they needed a GLP-1 to get their body back into a quote unquote balance, is from a diet that they've been avoiding, but now they need that diet to counteract the negative effects from the GLP-1 that they're taking. I find that very interesting.
Yes, kind of. But I suppose also they've got the psychological ability to do that now, which perhaps they couldn't before. And it might be as much to do with the impacts on dopamine. We're still learning a lot about these meds, but it might be as much about the impact on the addictive centers of the brain that the impact is having. And then when you stop the injections, that just comes straight back. Yeah. So you are kind of going, this is what you should have been doing in the first place. And the injections are giving you the opportunity to do that, hopefully. I think the big problem for me is the people who don't bother to do that at all. So if we can educate people that they still need to eat, they can do this, what we call either I'm never quite sure what the best phrase is for this, time restricted eating or fasting, but it feels like that's never the right phrase. But you're eating less food less often, I just say, of better quality is just my way of summing it up. You're making sure there's sufficient protein and good fats in that. And I think we're seeing anecdotally that the people who get this, and it is mainly the people who get this, and it may be a small percentage of the GLP-1 users, they are changing their diets in a positive way. They are going, well, hey, I fancy eating oily fish with some brown rice and some broccoli now. I never used to fancy this food before, but actually I really quite like this and look forward to it. So there is an opportunity to change diets in the right way. That then means that you're going to have better outcomes and mitigate some of those risks, because there are big downsides to the GLP-1s. It's nothing that works comes without risk or without side effects, you know?
Absolutely. So with those risks, what should people look for? What kind of common side effects should people be aware of that would be concerning?
Yeah, so it's digestion is the one thing people notice mostly, and it's probably more likely to happen. It's still lowish percentages, but significant. So you get a certain percentage increase in reflux because of the slowed gastric emptying. So if you're prone to reflux, and probably were prone to reflux before, I'm thinking, if maybe your stomach function wasn't optimal before, and then suddenly you throw in this medication that slows down gastric emptying, if you still tend to eat in the evening because you starve yourself all day on the meds and then go, oh, I forgot to eat, it's 9 o'clock at night, now I'll eat some food, and then you go to bed an hour later or an hour and a half later, though that's like the perfect storm for reflux. So watch out for reflux, watch out for your heartburn getting worse or becoming there, taste of acidity in the mouth, silent reflux, which would be coughing associated with a meal. Watch out for that. You might develop reflux or make your reflux worse from these medications. And the same reflux advice goes, you can try slippery elm to calm things down. You need to change your eating patterns, basically make sure you don't eat too late, make sure you're not overeating, which, there is a possibility as well that GLP-1s can improve someone's reflux, depending on the person, just by making them eat less. It depends, but there is a percentage of people who have more reflux. The other thing would be motility, change in bowel habit. So constipation, diarrhea, and it's a bit of a mixture about what people get. Slightly favors diarrhea, interestingly, even though overall everything's slowed down. But constipation or diarrhea can happen. And it's quite alarming how people just accept this. When I've watched some of the YouTube videos and some of the social media stuff, the conversations are around, oh yeah, of course I got constipated. So then I went to my GP and I got something for the constipation. Now I'm fine. And it's like, this is the solution for some people. So again, we've got a role to play there of increase soluble fiber and try to look after your gut and microbiome. Maybe in that context, take a probiotic as well that can be often a prokinetic, as we call it, boost motility. Do those things as well. So watch out for changes in bowel habit and don't just brush them under the carpet and go, oh, well, this is how it rolls with GLP-1s. No, this is not normal. This is a side effect. Talk to a practitioner or whatever, or, deal with it. There are things that we can do. And the other watch out for changes in mood. Usually people are elated, maybe artificially so, by the weight loss. Usually people's mood improves, but there's a subset of people. I'm developing a bit of a theory that it might be a little bit more men than women as well, and men of a certain age, and could relate to other things like low testosterone. But I'm noticing that there is a bit of a tendency for some people to get quite depressed, almost suicidal, and the lower dopamine might be almost playing in a negative for them. Maybe they're a bit susceptible to low dopamine periods before. So I do think there's a psychological thing to watch out for. And obviously I have noticed some people who've went on the GLP-1s, actually felt awful, just felt like I had no love for life, it really affected my mood, and I went off them and I'm so glad, they were terrible for me. That is a story that you will see occasionally. Again, it tends to be people are more happy than sad, but depending on who you are and what you were like before you started taking the medications, that's an option. And that's obviously a more dangerous option to watch out for, and maybe ask your nearest and dearest to monitor and tell you if you are grumpy, moody, worse than usual or whatever, and that might need some attention. Even the GLP-1s are not for you. You could be heading towards suicide ideation and stuff. And also very rarely to mention, but can happen, is that hypoglycemia, that improvement to blood glucose regulation, might play out as a negative if you're doing other things. So if you're already on another diabetic medication, you take GLP-1s, you might be slightly more prone to a big dip in blood sugar because the medications add to each other's effect. Equally, if you go GLP-1s, I'm not eating much, I'm going to go down the gym, I'm really going to do this. Actually, maybe you weren't that overweight in the first place, maybe you were 30 BMI. You could get into a catabolic state more regularly than you realize, where actually you are not eating enough, doing far too much in your life at work and in the gym or whatever. And actually you start to feel faint and start to feel like you haven't got enough energy and you're actually wearing yourself down. So there's some of the sort of pitfalls to watch out for, where you might be overdoing it, or you might need to be thinking about doing things in a different way, or using some supplements sometimes maybe to support.
One thing I've always considered thinking about GLP-1s and the effect on the body is that there's going to be an increased burn rate and everything is going to speed up in the system. Now, sometimes we know that toxins can also be stored into our tissues, especially our fat tissues. So if there's an increased burn in those tissues, we could say now we're liberating more toxins out into the bloodstream. And we know that the body has a certain detox capacity. So if the body is now being overwhelmed with toxicity that's liberated, could this not be a potential issue why people may be feeling off or having negative effects?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but then I don't think the pharma industry is going to be concerned with that concept. It's not something that's in their playbook to be looking at. They're going to be monitoring HbA1c and stuff like that, maybe muscle mass. And so that's coming through, that there's data on those kinds of negatives, the pancreatitis, the gallbladder issues, the obvious stuff. I would say absolutely yes, because I think my main concern about the medications is people losing weight too fast. They don't need to lose weight this fast. It's almost seen as an objective to get more weight loss more quickly by the new drugs that are being developed and that are coming out this year, the retatrutide, etc. So for me, I'm going, no, this could be good for some people, but they really don't need to go for it. And one of the things you're going to be doing is mobilizing toxins, maybe mobilizing heavy metals, remembering that our bodies are adaptive and sometimes the fat is there for a reason, and the fat is containing things. Fat to some degree is connective tissue, and connective tissue is used as a store for all sorts of things, for toxins, and also for arguably for, things that have gone in our lives that are, locked in certain sort of muscles and stuff, if you're a body worker, etc. So in a sense, what you're doing here is ridding yourself of a load of connective tissue that also actually developed an adaptive function for you. And so that's a consideration. So again, it might be that for some people, liver support is needed. Equally on the opposite side of that, if people a big change is people drink less, smoke less, use social drugs. Yes, if that's what they were doing. Maybe they eat less processed food, maybe, but that's not a given. So there is also, again, an opportunity, and it might be working out for a lot of people, that their toxic load dramatically reduces from those ingested toxins at any rate. From that. So there might be a little bit of a trade-off, but it's definitely something to bear in mind, that people might be liberating toxins too fast and they might be getting symptoms from that.
Yeah. So for somebody that is on GLP-1s, what would your non-negotiables be for them?
Do your research, get advice, read a book, watch a podcast like this, understand the downsides as well as the upsides, understand how it works for you, or talk to somebody like a practitioner who understands how it can work for you. I always say what you bring to the party is what you get at the party. These are very powerful drugs. They could be useful for you. They might well be useful for you, but understand the consequences for you in different health areas and deal with them. Definitely change your activity levels, but also don't overdo it. Don't go mad. Because you could get catabolic, especially if you weren't really overweight to start with. Well, if you were really overweight, to be honest, I think it's a great idea to be pegging it down the gym 4 or 5 times a week. Yeah. You know, there are other issues there, but do some exercise, but do it properly. And it's going to be an emphasis more on resistance training and flexibility and, you know, making sure you're maintaining bone mass. Change your diet. Don't forget to eat. It may be that you only fancy eating twice a day, but make sure that you do at least do that, and give yourself modest meals that are of good composition when you do it. Look out for your digestion in particular, I would say. Any digestive side effects, I would say deal with them, find a supplement to deal with them. Probably in that case, it's going to be a enzyme probiotic, kind of liver support, those kinds of things that would really help. I think they're the main things I would. Oh, and also big one. Don't be pressured by the prescribing pharmacist who's probably an online prescribing pharmacist who's never met you, but asked you to upload a video or a photo of yourself or whatever. Don't upload your mate's photo, by the way, or video. Don't cheat. Make sure it's actually you. That happens. But, you know, don't go on the escalator of going up the doses when you don't need to. Yeah. So on Mounjaro, which is likely to be the main medication people are on, probably like the best one that's in the middle, but can still make you lose weight too fast. But probably the best option of all of them, I would say, as a sort of ballpark statement. If you're on Mounjaro, tirzepatide, start on your 2.5 milligrams, stay on it for as long as you can. You'll find a massive effect. You know, you'll be hearkening back to those golden days when you were losing weight on 2.5 milligrams on less money. So stay on it. Go up the doses as you need to, as your weight loss maybe plateaus, but understand that there are plateaus as well that naturally happen. If you're losing weight in a moderate, sensible way, embrace it. Don't go too fast. Please don't go too fast. Don't go up to 15 milligrams as quickly as possible, because I tell you what, when you're on that 15 milligrams, it's expensive and it's really hard to get off that dose, because all the evidence is suggesting for maintenance that people might have to stay on some dose or another if they do absolutely nothing else in their lives. So, you know, this can potentially be a medication for life. So, and I'm a big believer in microdosing, but it does depend on whether you can persuade your prescribing pharmacist to do this. But when you get to the target weight that you need to be, I would always say try to get down to the minimum dose necessary with the other changes. Don't just rely on the medication. Less of a medication is always better than more. If you can use the medication as, let's say, 30 to 50% support, rather than it being solely responsible for the effect, that's a much better scenario in terms of side effects than having to be on 15 milligrams for the rest of your life.
Yeah. So before somebody would start a GLP-1 medication, what would your idea be of an ideal assessment to see if they should actually be on one?
I mean, at the moment, the prescribing pharmacist, certainly in the UK, depending where you are. So in the NHS in the UK, you have to be pretty overweight, pretty high BMI, and have comorbidities, which is a shame in a way. I can understand why they've done it that way. They're saying, you know, this is if you really need this stuff. On the private pharmacies, there's more flexibility, and it tends to be BMI of usually around 30 with no other comorbidities. So in other words, if you can demonstrate that you're pretty overweight, which a 30 BMI is, and, you know, potentially moving towards, well, you're probably in the lower end of obese and potentially health effects in the future, then I think that's a good, and you're really not able to lose weight any other way and you've tried, then I think that might be the sort of area where, and it's where the private pharmacies are going to consider you anyway, where you go on it. But I would say you're not really obese and metabolically challenged. You might not even be pre-diabetic yet. It's very much prophylactic, preventative, and maybe a little bit vanity because you'd rather look a little bit better than you do. Try to do it, but do it on a lower dose and do it knowingly and do it in the way that we've said. Don't be doing it if your BMI is probably down more towards 25 to 28. Maybe that's where and in theory then the prescribing pharmacists should be more skeptical about prescribing to you, and they might be expecting you, I think, to have evidence of a comorbidity and something else going on, like high cholesterol or pre-diabetic, some sort of evidence of some other marker as well as weight that suggests that you're in more of a disease state. What they're going to be looking out for and what we need to be mindful of is actually, if your weight's okay and you can keep your weight under control through diet and lifestyle, that's what you should do. That's what we all should do, because these are not innocuous medications. So we shouldn't be using them as a panacea. And we really need to be very mindful of people who are doing it, like some of the celebs did, to be fair, earlier on with their private doctors prescribing it, of just wanting to look amazing, just wanting to fit into that lower dress size or whatever, just wanting that nice, lower collar size shirt that makes them look nice and slim. That sort of more cosmetic application for these medications, which is definitely a danger, and obviously more of a danger for people who are more of a kind of eating disordered mindset, and struggle with those issues of body image more than others. And there's a danger there. There's a danger of this being prescribed for teenagers, etc. There's all that stuff that we know that hopefully it's just common sense. We're not going to want to go down that road with this becoming a cosmetic medication.
Yeah. So where do you think this field is heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think more and more people are going to get on the injections because we are an obese society. And I think if this is the thing, here's where people might disagree with me and throw things at the screen. If this is the way that we have to turn it around for the sake of public health, for me, I'm up for it. I think with all the provisos I've said, and I'm very much a glass half full, sometimes glass half empty on this, double-edged sword, two sides of the coin. Choose your cliche of choice. Like with a lot of things in life, there's an upside and a downside. But I think that for those people who are like 30 BMI, who, to be honest, are going to be a healthcare strain in future, let's get them losing weight however we can. And if GLP-1 injections figure in that, if they can afford it, if we can do it properly and sensibly, it might be a bit of a breakthrough medication for society. And I think in the long run, it's going to help us as practitioners, because we're going to be reducing that cardio-metabolic inflammatory chronic disease picture. The chances are overall, and it's not cut and dry, the chances are overall we'll get less cancer. We'll get less inflammatory problems. Maybe we'll get less autoimmunity. We'll see as the data presents itself. But because we know that metabolic dysfunction and what people are putting in their mouths is at the heart of the growth in ill health for the last sort of 50 odd years, this is potentially, unfortunately for us, this is where we've got to, and this is potentially the solution we could use. So I do see more people using it, but my hope is that we can have a real public health campaign and practitioners can all get on board with this to say all the things I've said during this video and make sure that people use the opportunity to turn their lives around in the right way. And as you said earlier, to understand why we got here in the first place and to unlock that understanding of why we got here in the first place and what we need to do.
Yeah. So then I got one last question for you. So then for the listeners who are maybe taking these medications or maybe even considering them, or maybe we have practitioners that are supporting patients on them, what is the most important takeaway?
Be careful about how you're doing this. Embrace it, but don't see weight loss as the overall objective. It's health improvement. That's the objective. And I think, that's probably the key takeaway that underpins what I've said. Weight loss is part of that for some people, and this helps them with that. But if you consider and keep at the front of your mind that health improvement is your objective, not just pure weight loss, and use the injections in the right way, if that's what you've chosen to do, then let's try to use it as an opportunity to change behaviors, change diets, frequency of eating, and improve the health picture for people in the right way, so that hopefully at the end of the day, we have a healthier society overall.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that, Chris. I really appreciate your conversation today. And I think a lot of people will find this very valuable because as the popularity of the GLP-1s go up, I do think there is a little bit of lack of knowledge with that. So if this can point people in the right direction, then that's fantastic. And on that note, for the listeners, if you know anybody that can benefit from that, please share it with them and subscribe to the podcast because this is how we are able to get the information out more and more to those that really need it. So again, before we close, for Chris, for anybody wanting to get in touch with you or with Cytoplan, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, well, we've got a website. That's the obvious, easiest thing. So cytoplan.co.uk, you can see what we've got. Importantly, probably for the people watching or listening, we've got a team of NTs that I work with, nutritional therapists rather, that I work with. So you can ask for advice. So don't feel that you've got to go on the website and just buy stuff and just not know, well, which supplements might help. Yeah. The whole point of Cytoplan is we can give you a recommendation. You can tell someone your individual needs and they'll tell you to take a supplement, maybe not tell you to take a supplement, but see what works for you. So we're there to support people on their journey.
Great. Excellent. Fantastic. We'll throw that in the show notes as well. And so again, Chris, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you to our listeners. And until the next time, we'll see you on the next episode of the Integrative Continuum. Take care. Thank you for joining me on the Integrative Continuum. I hope today's conversation gave you new insights and practical tools for your own health journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Share it with someone who would benefit and leave us a review. It helps us spread this message further. Until next time, I'm Dr. Richard Rocker. Stay curious, stay empowered, and keep moving forward on your path to integrative health.